Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwin, and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about the Tyranids as we get into the phases of the Tyranid attack. Now this is coming from the Imperium, this is coming from one of the older codex, so initially the Imperium knew very little of the Gene Stealer, so we're not going to get into the details of the Gene Stealer. That's a video all on its own. Right now we're going to do the overview of what it's like to be invaded by the Tyranids. So let's get into it. Let's get into 40 facts on the Tyranid invasion. This study has been one of the most difficult in the experience of the strategic collection. The primary problem of strategic examination of the aliens designated as the Tyranid race is endangered by their mobility and their methods of attack. Hive fleets of varying sizes have been encountered by the Imperium, and only one unifying feature of their methods has been established. Add to that the Tyranids maintain no permanent establishment on habitable worlds once they have been subsumed. It appears that the Hive fleet stops in one place only long enough to strip the world they have conquered before disappearing into deep space until they strike again. In strategic terms, the Hive fleet's attack appeared to be primarily opportunistic. As worlds with desirable resources are discovered, the nearest Hive fleet will move to consume them. Thus, relentlessly, the Tyranids are drawn towards the inhabited space and most densely populated areas of the Imperium. As such, this document will confine itself to the known capabilities and actions of the Tyranids. Addenda shall be added as and when overall strategic objectives for the Tyranid Hive fleets can be determined. The invasion of the system by Tyranids can be broken down into 5 discrete phases: discovery, approach, attack, subdual, and consumption. Their first phase is discovery. This discovery of potential targets is undertaken primarily by warp-capable scout drones, which disperse amongst the star systems close to a Hive fleet. Over the course of decades, these living ships methodically investigate planets, and upon discovery of a good candidate, seed worlds with vanguard organisms such as lictors and gene stealer infiltrators and various gaunt species. It is believed that the psychic signature of these creatures draws the Hive fleet to them proportionally to their numbers. If the Tyranid nests are fruitful and multiply quickly, the Hive fleet is soon drawn to the apparently rich feeding grounds. Less successful colonies appear to be given a lower priority. This method is also employed by the use of wrecked space hulks to carry pockets of gene stealers ahead of a Hive fleet on the uncertain currents of the immaterium. If the creatures arrive at an inhabited world, they can infect its populace with a genetic corruption and achieve a vanguard of hybridized slaves, which will also attract the attention of a Hive fleet. The success of this approach can be gauged by the fact that the gene stealers have been encountered aboard space hulks in every segmentum of the galaxy. Likewise, gene stealer infestations are commonplace enough that the High Lords have issued no less than 80 decrees pertaining to their cleansing by exterminatus in the last decade. If all else fails, it is believed that the Hive ships perform some form of spectrographic analysis of the radiation from the nearest star to select a destination. We know this out of the fact that 72.3% of the encounters with Hive ships, as opposed to smaller drones, have taken place in a system containing a star with high radiation. Once the first phase of discovery has been completed, and the Hive fleet has chosen a destination, Phase 2, the approach phase, begins. The arrival of the Hive fleet is preceded by what the adepts term the shadow in the warp, a psychic disturbance which renders astropathic communication impossible, blots out the astronomicon, and renders warp travel extremely unpredictable. Both the relative distance and size of the Hive fleet affect the intensity of the warp shadow, but in several reported instances, entire sectors have disappeared beneath it. As such, the shadow in the warp forms an uncertain compass of the Tyranids' movements. All too often, the target of their attack becomes apparent only after it has been enveloped and rendered unapproachable. The bioships, which comprise the fleet, may either exit simultaneously at the edge of the system, or in many reported instances, exit in deep space and drift towards its objective. This latter approach renders the Hive fleet virtually invisible to long-range augury and astrotelepathic detection. There have been speculation that some Hive fleets may actually drift through real space for the entire voyage between systems, but as this would entail a journey time of at least centuries in hibernation, it must be consigned to the realm of conjecture. Once the Tyranid Hive Fleet has reached the planet, Phase 3 can begin, the attack phase. The Tyranid invasion is begun by the hive ships releasing spores into the target planet's atmosphere. The mix typically includes mycetic spores for landing vanguard and main forces, ground assault swarms, spore mines of a corrosive, poisonous, or explosive capability. Flying creatures are also dispatched in great numbers, primarily swarms of winged gaunt species, tended to by dropship-sized Harridan brood organisms. After the initial attack, Phase 4, the subdual phase, begins. In the initial phase of invasion, the flying swarms make concentric attacks in an effort to herd the life forms into the path of ground swarms. Pre-existing vanguard organisms will move to join the advance, presumably sharing their information of local DNA, topography, and resistance with higher synaptic receptors of the Tyranid hive mind. Ground swarms are typically swift-moving in this period, comprising largely of gaunt species and Tyranid warriors, joined by vanguard lictors and gene stealers. The primary weapon of the Tyranids at this time is terror, their objective, the encirclement of all life forms on the planet prior to consumption. Resistance is attacked and overrun as quickly as possible, regardless of the casualties to the Tyranid themselves. Battles are frequently reinforced and expanded by the direct dropships of additional mycetic spores from the hive ships in orbit. The ground swarms are continuously reinforced with increasingly powerful contingents of Tyranid warriors, bioartillery, and specialized organisms like the Carnifex assault beasts and the hive tyrants. As resistant lines stabilize, they are infiltrated or smashed with coordinated wave attacks and mycetic spore drops. Centers of resistance are surrounded, besieged by the gathering of increasingly large and powerful swarms until they are overrun. Once all life forms have been rounded up, Phase 5 can begin, the consumption phase. Strictly speaking, the consumption of the planet under attack is continuous from the moment the hive ship achieves low orbit and releases organisms into the atmosphere. However, the point upon which the hive ships begin to replenish their reserves of biomass from the planet is a discrete phase, which forms the culmination of the Tyranid assault. Initially, emerging Tyranid feeder organisms spring up in the wake of the ground swarm's advance, mobile ones following hard at its heels, while stationary varieties spread and multiply at a ferocious rate, absorbing all life. Carrion from the battlefields is quickly consumed and used by several species to pupate and metamorphose into larger life forms. Biofactory organisms harvest and transmute the remaining feeders into nutrition gels, which are employed to feed the fighting swarms, and drone ship haulers, which replenish the hive ships in orbit. During this period, climate and humidity is subject to modification as increasing numbers of Tyranid organisms manipulate weather patterns to achieve maximum growth. Carbon dioxide and nitrogen are leached away, leading to an increasingly oxygen-rich environment. As resistance is overcome, more and more of the planet's surface is stripped bare by continuous harvesting until the Hive Fleet concludes its action by draining the planet's atmosphere and seas. At this point, many hive ships will split, adding to the fleet's numbers of drone vessels and immature bioships. With the attack complete, the Hive Fleet will then move into deep space again to seek a new target. And those were 40 facts on the Tyranid invasion. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said in the beginning, this is coming from an older codex. Back in the day, the Tyranid codex, probably around, or just codex in general, back in 5th edition, had different layouts. So it wasn't more, it wasn't like lore based in terms of they just told you the lore. It was more like they gave you transcripts of different imperial documents that explain different races, which is cool. It's interesting. There's also a couple stories that are just like battle stories that I want to do videos for and add cool animations and stuff like that. Now there is parts that we didn't get into details as far as like the gene stealers and how they work. We're going to do a separate video for a gene stealer cult, and we already have a video on the Narwhal or Narwhal, I think it's Narwhal ship. Basically, in the beginning it was saying that a Tyranid invasion or a Tyranid hive fleet comes into like a world through the warp. Again, those are old codex. It's an old codex, so that's wrong. Nowadays, the new lore is that they actually use this little ship that they send out ahead of the entire Hive fleet, and then they grab onto that Hive fleet and they actually bend time and space, and then they like basically create a wormhole for themselves and they scoot up. We've explained it in the Greater Wall episodes a couple times, but it's another way that the Tyranids can perform faster than light travel without using the warp, because they don't normally go into the warp. That's not to say that they can't go into the warp rift or into the Eye of Terror or anything like that. It just means that for travel, they don't really do that. And again, more stories to come. If you guys enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends on Reddit or Facebook. It really helps out the channel when you share our videos. If you guys like our content, don't forget we have a Patreon. It's a simple $1 a month, and it helps us create more videos for you guys. It gives us more time to invest in videos. But yeah, thanks for all the support, guys, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.